I've got a question for you guys based on a pattern that I've been seeing lately. Why is it that every time Jack Black sings, it's always the best part of the movie? I mean, it can't be a coincidence, right? It always works that way for me. It's there with the Mario movie, School of Rock, even though that's an actually good movie, the last Kung Fu Panda movie, which technically it's not a part of the actual movie, but it is the best thing related to it by far, and now this movie. This man is an objective musical prodigy, it's decided. So yes, the real DreamWorks movie released a few weeks ago, and given how I've made it my mission to remind y'all of the cinematic brilliance behind those first three and basically every single one of my pieces, let's just say that I have some thoughts. But right now we're not talking about Kung Fu Panda 4, we're talking about Kung Fu Pandas 1 through 3. The reason why we're talking about Kung Fu Pandas 1 through 3 is because, well, I missed the Furious 5.
Monkey, Mantis, Crane, Viper, Tigress.
So we're gonna talk about the Furious 5, because DreamWorks doesn't seem to want them in these movies anymore. And by DreamWorks, I mean Mike Mitchell. Yeah, I saw that information that was leaked about the fourth movie's production on Twitter. But again, this video is about the Furious 5, all of whom I don't think get nearly enough credit in these movies. While the things that make them so endearing in my eyes are things that I did acknowledge long before 4's existence, I didn't expect to feel their absence as much as I did until after seeing this movie. Functionally having both old and new characters serve as replacements for them, which is why in this piece I'm going to not just make the case for why the Furious 5 are amazing, but also that yes, they are in fact more fleshed out and utilized in this trilogy than you think. And as a result, do serve a vital purpose to the narrative beyond being Poe's teammates, even just within the confines of the movies. And while I could very much have stronger enforcement if I got into the extended canon like the shorts or Legends of Awesomeness, which do somewhat serve as an effective way of giving backstory and allowing them to show off their personalities more, I'm gonna keep this conversation limited to the film, since that's the most easily accessible and mainstream story of this world. Oh, and also, I'm gonna be sporadically throwing out thoughts on Kung Fu Panda 4 when they're relevant to the conversation, so spoilers for that movie too.
We should hang out. Agreed.
I feel like even when it comes to some of the most iconic ensemble casts in pop culture, in the confines of film specifically, there's usually at least one or two supplementary characters that are mostly just there for entertainment purposes. And no, I don't think a character needs to have emotional depth or added backstory to be entertaining or even well written. I typically determine that based on the metric of how well they succeed at fulfilling their role in the story, and if that role is well defined. But when surrounded by other characters that do have a lot going on with them, if they're not entertaining enough on their own merits, it can stand out and ultimately make them feel like a bit of a weak link. And Kung Fu Panda is no exception.
Monkey.
It's important to note and contextualize the starting point of all the five's relationships with Poe on an individualistic level before getting into their own characteristics that I think add to the experience and make them stand out amongst each other. Monkey is definitely on the more comedic end of things with how he initially treats Poe, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's the most laid-back member of the group. Even from the very first scene where they all attack Shifu, the thing he points out is his speed, which could definitely be categorized under the actual martial art technique, but emphasizes that trait. And this carries over to his interactions with Poe once he's chosen to be the Dragon Warrior. Like, look at his face when he's introducing himself to them compared to everyone else. They're all disapproving and annoyed, but Monkey's just more skeptical. He's just like, this guy, really? In a way, his mindset as he processes the fact that he wasn't chosen to be the Dragon Warrior is more so tied back to who it ended up being instead. In fact, this more or less applies to all the five with one exception. If it was any of them that was chosen by Oogway to be the Dragon Warrior, then they'd most likely be more understanding even if the disappointment was still present. They've been established to have trained much longer and more significantly under a much more strict and traditional doctrine. But Poe doesn't have either of those things, like, at all. Now pay close attention to this dialogue in the scene after Poe attempts to complete the various training sectors. Tigress points out that it was a mistake on Oogway's part and that someone knowing Kung Fu would be the bare minimum requirement for whoever he chooses to be the Dragon Warrior. But then Crane simultaneously reinforces and counters that idea. That yes, someone knowing Kung Fu to stop the snow leopard would be ideal, but says the bar should be even lower through this line.
Yeah, or could at least touch his toes.
With Monkey Monkey getting the last word in this conversation.
Or even see his toes.
Yeah, so that is unnecessarily cruel on their part. It really does imply that they consider Poe to be the worst case scenario for this significant position. And I do think it's somewhat significant that Monkey is the one who finishes this conversation off. He's the one that sets a personal bar for what he considers to be, let's just call it Dragon Warrior material. The idea that Poe is destined to stop Tai Lung is such an outlandish idea for all of them, but what distinguishes those emotions shared by them is how and why they react the way they do. In the case of Monkey, he just thinks it's funny, watching him continuously struggle at what comes naturally to him. I'll say that out of all the 5 members of the team, I think he's the one established to be the most won over by Poe's perseverance specifically, evident by this line once he has to do the one-on-one combat and then is thrown down the stairs by Shifu. They're all reasonably shocked that he's enthusiastic about fighting him after taking beating after beating. And then, as he's falling, Tigress asserts that if he's smart, he won't come back up those steps, with Monkey casually responding with,
But he will.
which indicates an acceptance that Poe isn't gonna give up, but in a way that almost seems admirable towards him. With that being said, I do still once again consider Monkey to be the weakest link out of the 5 in terms of both his developments and characterization. He doesn't really have a moment in the film where he has a positive interaction with Poe on an individual level where they get to understand each other, and overall, I think Mantis is the more fleshed out version of what they were trying to go for with him, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Everything about him is more or less just implied, and his relationship with Poe moving forward is primarily played for jokes. On top of the movie obviously not really utilizing Jackie Chan that much considering his limited dialogue.
I don't know prostate.
Wait, they put the prostate in there?
No, plastic.
Oh, plastic!
Plastic!
Bro, plastic, I'm sorry!
But even in the case of that casting, you can very much make an argument for his character being representative of his very prolific career in martial arts media, which spanned over 40 years at the time. In the production notes of this movie, where Melissa Cobb is discussing the reasoning behind the casting choice of the 5, she said the following about Monkey.
We had to have Jackie Chan in our movie. I mean, he's such an icon in kung fu movies, and the monkey characters seemed a perfect fit. We had Jackie come in, and we pitched him the movie and showed him the characters. He was thrilled to see an American animation studio doing a movie about kung fu, and he sensed the opportunity to really broaden the audience for kung fu around the world.
And as for Jackie Chan's own feelings on the role, he said,
For all these years, I've liked comedy. I used comedy together with my kung fu. I think it really fits me. And for all these years, jumping around and fighting, I'm just like Monkey. I think the writers and the animators have watched my movements, my characters, my everything. It seems like they copied me, which is nice. Monkey is acrobatic, playful, and confuses the enemy very easily.
So Monkey being the way he is does feel like it would mirror the attitude of someone who's been doing this for a long time, to the point where it's second nature. And I can't really call this an instance of it just being a casting choice for the sake of it, and the interactions that he has with Poe show how well both their more laid-back attitudes complement each other and make for some very nice moments that add levity to the action sequences. His general attitude towards the art form is most analogous with Poe's. Even after he becomes the Dragon Warrior, he never adopts the more vigorous and rigid demeanor of them, enhancing how his influence gradually allows the art form to become more accessible beyond the elites. It doesn't always have to be serious and disciplined, sometimes it can just be fun, which is one of the reasons why 3 is my favorite of the franchise. Yes, 2 is still the best, I will acknowledge that, but 3 is bar none my favorites.
Subtle, Poe. Very subtle.
Oh, hey, hi. You're up.
Am now.
If there was one character that I believe got screen time that was directly proportional to what they are in the story, it's Crane. I think he would be my strongest argument for the idea that a character having added backstory is neutral in relation to how much you enjoy them. Because his personality isn't made more or less engaging by something like this.
I wasn't allowed to run or play, and she tied pillows to all the sharp corners in the house. She just didn't believe I could take care of myself.
Crane is kind of a comic relief character. His relationship with Poe is wanting to be as distant from him as possible the moment he gets there. I don't think that his initial interactions with him are actively as negative as the others, but I do think they paint a perfect illustration of that good old argument of nice versus kind. One of which is defined by appearance and usually motivated by insecurity of how other people interpret interactions.
You're like really pretty.
Thank you.
So you agree?
and the other being defined by empathy and a genuine desire to treat others well. Crane is the textbook representation of that idea in this first movie, and the worst part is that it's a net positive from Poe's perspective.
Don't mention it.
No, really, I appreciate
Ever.
And he takes every chance to let Poe know this in a way that sounds polite, but this actually leads to a lot of funny moments with them. One of my personal favorite bits in there is when he and Poe are about to have a one-on-one, and before Crane even gets a chance to do anything, he lets him fall in the tortoise of wisdom, just casually backing away as he struggles to get out. Crane views the whole debacle as a waste of time, and is a distant second to Tigress for being the most put off by Poe's personality. I don't think it's an accident that they have back-to-back conversations with Poe during the scene that immediately follows their ridicule of him. It's subtly effective direction. But then again, nothing is an accident according to Master Oogway.
There are no accidents.
Yes, I know.
And let's bring up this scene while we're on this topic. What distinguishes Crane from Tigress is that he doesn't ever want to hurt Poe's feelings directly to his face. He's very passive-aggressive when it comes to interacting with him. Instead of saying thanks to you as a response to Poe waking him up, he says, am now. It stems from frustration, but in a way that appears more friendly than it may be. When he corrects himself after he sees Poe's hurt at the comment, you don't belong here, saying he meant his actual room, it's kept ambiguous why he decided to do this. He could very much have the same attitude that Tigress has towards him, so was that genuinely what he meant? It could be interpreted in different ways, that it was an honest misinterpretation, that he wants him out of his room and the Jade Palace. Based on everything we've seen from him so far, I believe it to be the former. Crane is very strategic about what he decides to say about Poe when he's not around and when he's interacting with him face to face. I think he just wanted to do whatever he could to get Poe out of his way, with Poe's understandable interpretation being what Tigress would bluntly tell him right afterward. He's very practical when it comes to the evaluation of situations, and that carries over beyond his relationship with Poe, though it's much more prevalent in the sequels. And he can be pretty socially awkward sometimes.
Hey, maybe you can't watch me be killed?
Stop being a wimp.
One detail that I also like is in the second movie where Monkey uses the caw kiki sound as a battle signal, and Poe says it's like when Crane does it before he gets defensive by insisting he's never made a noise like that. But then after Poe is thought to be dead by everybody and returns to defeat Shen, he uses that sound. And the wings of phrases previously only used by Poe are now something he uses regularly in combat.
Wings of surveillance.
It's a nice touch to show how he's gotten something from their interactions, even if they still have those clashing personalities. He's a lot like Tigress in how seriously he takes Kung Fu, but he's also able to find confidence in breaking conventions every so often. See, little moments like this continue to endure us to the Five's connection with Poe as friends and teammates. This is what the best found family stories can accomplish, where there's messiness, tension, and a variety in ideology and personality. Yet they still love each other at the end of the day without having to try and change who each of them are at their core. It's a concept that I believe is not impossible, but very difficult to pull off in the medium of film compared to television, which has the advantage of dedicating individual episodes to fleshing out a singular cast member. So when it comes to movies, especially action movies, the little details with characters matter, and Kung Fu Panda is one of the best instances of it being done right.
But if I didn't know any better, I'd say he was trying to get rid of me.
This is the point where we start getting into the characters, so I have a lot more to say about beyond the first movie. And yes, I am cheating a little by including Mantis and Viper in the same segment, but that's because I consider them to be two sides of the same coin, which you wouldn't think at first glance. Before we get into that though, we need to talk about the action. Calling these fight sequences exceptional would be an understatement. This is the one CG DreamWorks film from the 2000s that I can say everything holds up by modern standards, but I'm not bringing them up to discuss them from a technical standpoint, rather from an expository and thematic standpoint, because they contribute to those things more than you think. Kung Fu Panda is a movie about anthropomorphic animals doing kung fu, but although it has no shame in giving us a ton of good jokes surrounding that goofy concept, the foundation is always taken seriously. Because while the five are based on martial arts techniques present in East Asia, it's important to remember that translating them to the animals they're based on had to be done from scratch. In the words of one of the co-directors of this film, John Stevenson,
there's a big difference between Kung Fu and various other martial arts. We were determined that it be Kung Fu and not Jiu-Jitsu or Karate or Taekwondo or any other discipline. But at the same time, we had to make it unique to our movie, because our protagonists are, after all, animals.
A lot of effort was put into the way each of the characters were designed, with the creative team even hiring a biomechanist to get an understanding of the way each of their real-life counterparts move, as well as working with several martial artists as a frame of reference for the choreography.
In the process of making Rodolphe, our Kung Fu guy and great animator and story artist, was helping us by conceiving how the character would move and how they would fight.
Yeah, you did this amazing task of translating that into the computer world. We really wanted to make sure that you connected and understood these two characters. The bow was particularly a visual way to do that, to actually show this very formal act that we know subtextually has so much more in it.
So why does this matter other than the fact that it gives the film a lot of visual class? Well, that leads us into one of the film's central themes represented by Poe, but also Mantis and Viper more explicitly. The one that most contributes to how they treat Poe. Let's go back to the talking point of Kung Fu starting off as a relatively closed art form. There's still a lot of diversity present in the Master's species, and at face value, that makes the theme about everyone being special and having the potential to be skilled at Kung Fu not seem like a message that needs to be learned. You'd also think Mantis would have more empathy for Poe and would be the last one to ridicule him just because of his size, but there's a deeper meaning to it. Poe's lack of experience is part of the reason why everybody has so much doubts about him becoming the Dragon Warrior, but a lot of it is also rooted in assuming things about him because of his physical appearance.
Look at you, this fat butt.
And that's where the sub-theme comes in, where what's different about you is seen as a disadvantage. Here's what I mean by that. If a shark were to fall from the sky— actually no, that's a bad example. If a lion were to fall from the sky instead of a panda who also didn't have any experience, do you think they would have been adamant on the idea that he's incapable of being trained? Even Viper, despite her being the only one having empathy and care for Poe's well-being from the start, is the one that's implied to have made the decision to have everyone go after Tigress. What fuels her compassion is also what fuels her doubts. To re-emphasize this point, Poe is considered the worst case scenario for this situation, and that isn't solely because he's level 0 in his own words. That's what distinguishes him from the other wide array of masters that came before him. They may not be the ideal archetype when you think of Kung Fu masters, but they have something everyone considers to be an advantage in combat.
I've got no claws, no wings, no venom. Even Mantis has those thingies.
Without anybody realizing that his biggest strength is a direct result of his weight, that being his physical resilience. Even before he became the Dragon Warrior, that was implied. But sometimes people take the chance to be on the giving end when they see someone else they consider beneath them once they've proven themselves to society. Realizing that finally gives Mantis humility regarding how he treats Poe, bringing up how he's in no position to judge a warrior solely for their size. One last thing I should mention about Viper though, I have fuzzy memories of watching the first Kung Fu Panda on demand for the first time when I was 4, and I called her Snake for 5 years straight because I wasn't paying attention to what type of snake she was. I mean, thank goodness I moved past that long before that other DreamWorks movie came out. So when the 4th movie wants to have our antagonist function as a foil to Poe because she was considered too small, it oversimplifies what made his situation distinct. It's never just been about size with who's allowed in and who isn't. And that's the great thing that I like about the Five's inclusion, how their unique abilities are all utilized to their advantage that stands out the most with these two. It's the best example of practicing the concept of show, don't tell to justify why this narrative is enhanced by the characters being animals. It's meant to allude to themes that can translate into realistic fiction, but presents the story in a way that makes its effectiveness feel unique to this world. That's part of what makes the 4th movie stand out in a bad way for me. It's the first time a story in this universe feels like one where the characters just happen to be animals. But again, this video was long enough already, so I'm not going to go into it here.
Right? Tigress?
Oh boy, a lot of y'all are gonna hate me for this. Back when the 4th movie was first announced, this was actually conceived as its own independent video that never really made it past the draft stage, but here we are. Anyways, Poe, Tigress, why don't they get married already? I don't get it. Okay, so I want to make it clear that everything I'm going to be saying about these two's relationship is exclusively limited to the actual film canon. This is not going to be a dig towards personal headcanons / ships, whatever you want to call them. But no, I've never thought Poe and Tigress should get together romantically. And yes, the fact that they're both different species does play a small role in that.
Stupid fucking tiger panda.
DreamWorks has given us interspecies couples before, which I'm presuming is why people dismiss this talking point when discussing these two. But this goes back to that idea of these movies taking a conceptually goofy setup seriously, and tone is everything when it comes to an outlandish pairing like that. Like in Shrek, Donkey and Dragon isn't presented in a way that the audience is meant to take seriously. It's funny because of how absurd it is, and because it exists in the background, it never detracts focus from the emotional core of the story. And more significantly, Shrek being in a literal fantasy setting means that there are way more liberties in terms of internalized logic, which is ultimately the main indicator of whether or not something like this can work. To use a non-DreamWorks example of what I mean by this, BoJack Horseman takes its relationship drama very seriously, but it's also a setup that lets us know from the very beginning that in a world where humans and anthropomorphic animals live amongst each other, anything goes in terms of who's dating who. It's an idea that you get used to as the show goes along because it's clearly defined as the norm. Whereas with Kung Fu Panda, it would be distracting at best. That isn't the main reason why I think their relationship should be kept platonic though. There's a lot to talk about with Tigress getting the most amount of focus out of the five, and that's because there's a lot to talk about with why she feels the way she does towards Poe. Given the dynamic of the five before he entered the equation, it seems that she was the one everyone expected to be chosen as the Dragon Warrior. Shifu even says this out loud as a way of challenging Oogway's contradictory decision.
You were about to point at Tigress and that thing fell in front of her.
The seemingly obvious entry point for discussing her character would be the scene where she doesn't hold back in expressing how insulted she is by Poe's presence. But I wanted to direct you to a different scene that contextualizes the raw brutality present in why she's unwilling to hold back. It's the scene where she recounts Tai Lung's backstory. Why does this essential moment that establishes our villain and gives Shifu more nuance and depth given to her and not him? I think there's two reasons for this. First and foremost, it's clear after the scene directly preceding it that Shifu's not ready to emotionally open up to Poe about his trauma and guilt at what happens.
And make him suffer for it. Oh, yeah!
If anything, it would kind of juxtapose his characterization even after he does learn to train Poe. But even then, it could have been on a secret scroll or something and Poe could have stumbled upon it. Why does the movie have Tigress give us this information? Well, that leads into the second and more significant reason. This moment. I've always interpreted the way this scene plays out this way. While I have no doubt the rest of the five are more than willing to rise up to the task of defeating Tai Lung, Tigress feels as though she has a personal responsibility to be the better version of him, going far beyond just taking on the mantle of Dragon Warrior and stemming from wanting to bring her master peace and feeling the emotional hole that this tragic event left inside of him. Just this one scene shows how she's always sought his pride and approval, and the fact that this expression of vulnerability briefly carries over to the present, before she continues to chastise Poe for treating it like a joke, shows how what happened with Tai Lung was the driving force behind her attitude towards Kung Fu. I'll be the version of him that Shifu wanted him to be. It's why I don't think it's an accident how analogous their designs are, or the identical imagery present with the flashbacks of them training under Shifu. Feeling as though she's done everything right only for someone else to get it purely out of luck and without even trying. It gives you a deeper understanding of her resentment. If you'll notice, after Oogway passes and Shifu insists Poe is their only hope, she retaliates by asserting that this is what he trained all of them for. But the moment before she decides to go after him, she says that it's what he trained her for, once again establishing the personal responsibility she feels. It's only after she and the five lose to Tai Lung that she not only learns to respect Poe for his unique abilities, but also comes to accept her own limitations and alleviate herself of the self-inflicted pressure to fill that role. It doesn't diminish her worth as a kung fu master, and it's okay Shifu isn't the exact same person he used to be, even though he's now at peace. I do wish we got more positive interactions with him in the 5 and the sequels, though, to demonstrate this growth. But even then, I still think it's a very strong and compelling progression. Yet, it isn't where Tigress's development ends, leading us right into that second movie, and why I think so many people see a spark of attraction with these two. Part of what makes Kung Fu Panda 2 so rich and investing and, well, good, is the way that each of Po's relationships represent a unique idea that diverges from the central theme of this movie. That being, you as an individual decides what defines who you are. Po is very much secure in his identity as the Dragon Warrior, but not as his own person. And as for his allies, the character who understands this the most is Tigress. She sees through his optimism during that scene on the boat and tries to get him to open up about it. But you can tell that she's also a bit put off by the way he continues to appear not to understand the gravity of this situation as the film progresses. And the scene where he lets Lord Shen get away is the breaking point for her.
I have to go back.
She doesn't understand the fact that Po's being forced to relive his trauma and is in a constant state of being psychologically tortured by his lack of full knowledge of it. This illustrates why it takes longer for her to warm up to him than the others. The thing that frustrates her the most isn't the fact that Po's more laid back, it's that he refuses to give her an explanation as to why. Why he continues to endure, why he's so eager to go into battle, why it appears that he doesn't take anything about this situation seriously. That's why I think their individual fight scene is reserved for this movie and not the first one, because it serves a much deeper purpose in their relationship. Everyone seems to warm up to Po after his first day of training, except for her. But when Po finally does open up about why he decided to let Shen get away, and he says the hardcore can't understand, it all starts to come together. Even though they both respect each other as warriors, their progression throughout this movie is having a mutual understanding of each other.
The hardcore do understand, but I can't watch my friend be killed.
Tigress doesn't think somebody as jovial and enthusiastic as Po would have so much emotional baggage, and Po assumes that somebody as hardened as Tigress couldn't understand the emotional pain he was experiencing, which is what makes that hug one of the most emotionally effective moments in the entire franchise. I can understand why these interactions could be interpreted as romantic. Po brings out a new side to her that nobody else was able to do, and it's beautiful to see. But that's just it. Why does something like that have to be interpreted as a way of making them into a couple? Well, they're co-leads and they're the opposite gender, so that'd be the logical direction. It's always felt like a very surface level reading of their relationship and disregards the context of what we know about both of these characters. When you think about it, Po's not really at a level of maturity to take on a romantic relationship with Tigress, or anybody for that matter. They even make a joke about this in the third movie, and she's the most adorable thing ever. I'm aware that the talking point, why can't two people be friends, has been used in bad faith, particularly with LGBTQ couples. But if anything, it feels more relevant outside of that, since a lot of media has conditioned things like emotional vulnerability, hugging, etc. to be associated with romance, especially when it's between a man and a woman. And I think it's important to move past that and make an effort to show healthy and investing dynamics that aren't defined by one being sexually attracted to the other. We should make an effort to normalize people of different genders in media just being able to be friends rather than force a romance in favor of personal bias, at least in the actual canon storyline. Again, I'd be a massive hypocrite if I said all shipping was bad and just left it at that. There's an article that goes into more detail on this topic titled How Media Shapes Our Understanding of Intimacy, and here's an excerpt from that.
No one should ever go through life believing love only appears in the form of a romantic, intimate relationship instead of the platonic love between family and friends. People should never define their worth based on who loves them. Rather, their values should only shape how they choose to love others.
We really shouldn't underestimate the way media contributes to our perception of how the world works, especially when we're young. Love's a part of life, but can take on many forms. So I think it's really cool how Po and Tigress's bond is able to blossom into an equally strong and entertaining platonic friendship, where they're still able to maintain their personalities and help each other grow. Especially when she has to deal with that baby panda that clings to her because of Po's action figure. That's brilliant. I'm telling you, y'all are really sleeping on this third movie. It's so good. So, for as much as I've defended the Furious 5 in this video, I don't want it to be interpreted as me considering them to be perfect in terms of their writing. And maybe the next chapter of this ongoing narrative was able to function amidst their absence. But what made the decision to go this direction stand out to me the most was how sudden and out of nowhere it was in the narrative. And yes, the fact that DreamWorks might not have been able to afford the voice actors could be an understandable reason. But it's not like DreamWorks hasn't gotten new replacement talent in one of their mainstream movies when things like this happen. It wouldn't even bother me as much if the first three didn't commit to building them up not just simply as teammates but as a found family for Poe, only for them to just be gone without any in-universe buildup or conclusivity. That more than anything misunderstands the fact that they were part of what made those first three films so special. Whether it be their humor, their chemistry with Poe, their fight sequences, and even very quiet but effective growth and emotional resonance in some instances that I think a lot of people overlook, because they're surrounded by so many other phenomenal elements. But to quote historical fiction author Sarah Waters,
"Respect your characters, even the minor ones. In art, as in life, everyone is a hero of their own particular story. It's worth thinking about what your minor characters' stories are, even though they may intersect only slightly with your protagonist."
Because any character, regardless of how major or minor, can contribute to why you get invested in a continuous story. And that will always be me for the Furious 5. Thanks for watching, Minnows, and I'll see you again at the edge of the water.